Lily and I had been friends since we were kids, always kind of dancing around the idea that we might like each other more than that. We were finally about to admit our feelings when suddenly, this girl showed up, claiming to be our daughter from the future. She said that, in the future, I was a terrible person. She claimed I not only hurt her but also cheated on Lily with another woman. She said I eventually left Lily and her to run off with my mistress. Because of all that, she was dead set on stopping us from getting together. She'd rather never have been born than see that future happen. But she didn't know that I already knew about the future. I'd seen it. So, watching her desperately try to set Lily up with other guys, I couldn't help but smirk a little, inside. One day after school, Lily and I were pulled into a little alley behind the school by this girl. She was pretty, but she seemed totally out of it, calling me and Lily Dad and Mom. I just stared at her for a bit, then reached out to check if she had a fever. "Miss, are you okay?" I asked. She impatiently swatted my hand away and kept looking at Lily with tears in her eyes. "Mom, I'm serious! I'm really your daughter from the future!" Lily gave her a long, hard look, sounding annoyed. "If you're sick, go to the hospital." She grabbed my hand, ready to leave. But the girl quickly grabbed the bottom of Lily's school uniform, talking super fast. "Your phone password is Sam's birthday, right? You have a journal where you write down all of Sam's favorite things, right? And you're planning to tell him how you feel on his birthday, aren't you?" I froze, sneaking a look at Lily. To my surprise, the girl who was always so proud and cool was blushing like crazy. She glanced at me quickly, bit her lip, and asked, "How do you know that?" The girl smirked. "Because I'm your favorite daughter, obviously." I hadn't really noticed before, but now, looking closely at the girl's face, I realized her eyes did look like Lily's. A thought popped into my head, and I asked, "What's your name?" The girl seemed reluctant to talk to me and answered dismissively, "Hope." Hearing that name made my heart skip a beat. I remembered a conversation Lily and I had once. She had asked if I liked boys or girls better. I said I liked girls. That day, the vibe between us had been really flirty, and I even joked that if we ever got married and had a daughter, I'd name her Hope, to represent happiness and joy. I wanted us to be happy together, even when we were old and gray. Looking at Hope's lively face now, a mix of bitterness and disbelief churned inside me. Without thinking, I reached out to touch her hair, but she dodged away. When she looked at me, her eyes held clear dislike. "Mom, can you please stop liking Sam?" Her voice was filled with genuine hatred. "You're so good to him, but he's never happy. In the future, he not only abuses me, but also cheats on you with someone younger. When you found out, they even hurt you." Lily and I just stood there, frozen. Hope's words seemed to have hit home. Lily, almost without realizing it, got pulled into the emotion. She instinctively said, "That's impossible. Sam is a kind and gentle person." Hope looked frustrated. "I've traveled through time. I know exactly what kind of person he is. You're just too into him right now to see that you're missing out on your true love." Lily was about to argue more when a low voice came from the alleyway entrance. "Lily?" The moment Lily saw who it was, her face turned cold. But Hope's eyes lit up. "Uncle Finn!" Following their gaze, I turned to see Mark standing at the alley's entrance. He was wearing a baggy school uniform, and his thick glasses hid half his face. When he spoke, his words had a strong accent, and his braces showed whenever he opened his mouth. At first glance, everyone thought he was completely ordinary. But Mark had done something amazing, something others wouldn't dare. He once confessed to Lily publicly in front of the dorm building. Lily had politely turned him down, but the whole thing became a big joke among the students. They made fun of him, calling him delusional and saying he was way out of Lily's league. People thought Mark would give up after that. Surprisingly, he didn't. From that day on, he showed up everywhere Lily did. Eventually, Lily got so annoyed by him that she started treating him coldly, even sarcastically. Still, Mark didn't give up. He kept pursuing her. At that moment, Lily wasn't kind to him either. She grabbed my hand, trying to leave. But as we passed Mark, he grabbed her arm. I stepped forward, glaring at him. Mark immediately let go, carefully pulling 2 movie tickets from his bag. He nervously said, "Lily, can I take you to a movie this weekend? Just to thank you for helping me last time." Mark didn't come from a rich family. His accent often made him a target for ridicule at school, where students mocked him as a country bumpkin. Before, it had only been words. But after his confession to Lily, he offended the school bully who had a secret crush on her. The bully even challenged me to a fight after class, mad that Mark was even trying. Even though the bully was stronger, he couldn't beat me, and we actually bonded in a weird way after the fight. Strangely, the bully became a fan of me and Lily being a pair. So he naturally started picking on Mark. When Lily found out, she told the bully off, making him back off for good. Now, Lily didn't take the movie tickets, instead frowning and asking, "You're barely scraping by for tuition. Why waste money on movies?" Mark chuckled awkwardly, looking down. "I earned this from a part-time job over the past couple of days." Lily paused, her gaze faltering as she looked away. Then, in a cold tone, she said, "I'm busy. This weekend is Sam's birthday." As I held Lily's hand, leading her out of the alley, I glanced back. Hope was stomping her feet in frustration, while Mark stared at our clasped hands with clear jealousy and resentment. In his eyes, I saw a mixture of bitterness and hatred. It wasn't new. As Lily's childhood friend, I'd been with her for years. Our families were a good match, making me a constant reminder of what Mark lacked. Mark once confronted me about it, saying I was just lucky. He claimed that if he had my background, he'd be the one standing next to Lily. At the time, I was busy solving a math problem in my head, but I still gave him a polite smile and said, "Mark, instead of telling me this, why not go back and solve a few more problems? If you can't change your situation, why not work hard to change your future?" Unfortunately, my well-meaning advice was taken as an insult. From then on, Mark disliked me even more. Bringing my thoughts back to the present, we had reached my apartment building. Before we parted ways, I asked Lily what she thought about Hope's claims. She snorted. "Does she think she can call me Mom just because she's cute?" Then, glancing at me from the corner of her eye, her ears turning pink, she added, "Besides, our future daughter would never talk badly about you. She'd be sweet and gentle, just like me." A warmth spread through my chest. I thought to myself, maybe I was overthinking it. Could time travel really exist? The name Hope was probably just a coincidence. That night, maybe because of the strange events, I had an even stranger dream. In the dream, I was sitting at a desk, holding my phone, about to send a message. I stared at the contact labeled Sarah and typed, "Come with me." The reply came instantly. "Okay." The absurdity of it all hit me. I turned off the screen, and for a moment, in the faint reflection, I saw my own face. Thin, hollow-eyed, like someone who had been through a lot. Before I could make sense of it, the alarm clock went off. It was time to wake up for school. I sighed, shaking my head. Clearly, I was losing it. This weekend, I invited my friends to celebrate my birthday. After dinner, we headed to a karaoke bar to keep the party going. While thanking my classmates for their gifts, Hope's words kept echoing in my mind. I couldn't help but wonder if it was true. Was Lily really planning to confess to me on my birthday? But Lily seemed distracted today, constantly glancing at her phone. When thunder and rain suddenly started, she anxiously stepped outside to take a call. When she returned, she still seemed restless. My good mood from the birthday celebrations disappeared instantly. I wanted to ask her, didn't she say Mark's invitation didn't matter? Why was she acting like this now? Noticing the tension between us, my buddy, Joe, grinned and picked a duet for us, a sweet love song, teasing us to sing together. Lily snapped out of her daze, shyly turning to me. Would Princess Lilybell do me the honor of singing with the evil dragon Sparky? This was a game we used to play as kids. Lily would always play the kidnapped Princess Lilybell, and I'd be the dragon Sparky, rescuing her. Every time I saved her, she'd give me a light kiss on the cheek. My mood lifted slightly, and I nodded. But just as we got halfway through the song, someone burst into the room. It was Hope. Her clothes were soaked from the rain, and for some reason, seeing her like this made my heart ache a little. Ignoring everyone's surprised looks, Hope quickly approached Lily and exclaimed, "Mom, you have to save Mark. He was beaten badly by his dad's debt collectors and is in critical condition." Lily froze for a moment. Before Hope could say anything else, she dashed out of the room. My mind went blank. I couldn't feel any emotion, just instinctively chased after her. Rain poured heavily outside. I struggled to keep up with Lily, shouting her name as loud as I could, but she never looked back, getting into a car without hesitation. I ran after it for a few steps, but then my foot slipped, and something sharp cut my leg. Blood dripped into the cold rainwater, quickly washing away. Gritting my teeth, I stood up, cursing silently that Lily was crazy for not even bringing an umbrella. But then again, why didn't I bring one? I laughed bitterly. I guess I was just as crazy as she was. When I finally limped to the movie theater, the reality hit me. I watched Lily throw herself into a perfectly unharmed Mark's arms, sobbing as she lightly pounded his chest. The next second, Mark hugged her tightly, draped his jacket over their heads, and they ran off together. Suddenly, an umbrella appeared over my head. Startled, I turned to see Hope standing next to me. Her face was hard to make out in the dim rain, but her tone was clearly mocking. "See? That's my mom's true love. What are you even to her?" I didn't respond to her jab. Instead, I asked, "Aren't you cold?" Hope froze, staring at me for a moment before shoving the umbrella into my hand forcefully. "You're such an idiot!" she snapped, before running off into the pouring rain. I held onto the umbrella, standing there, unsure of what to do. The warmth left on the handle by Hope was quickly fading, much like my mood, which was growing colder by the second. At that moment, an unfamiliar car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down to reveal Joe's face. "Get in, man," he urged. Soaked to the bone, I hesitated, worried about getting the seats dirty. But Joe pushed me. Reluctantly, I opened the door and climbed in. "Thanks, Joe," I murmured, finally snapping out of my daze. Joe rolled his eyes. "Come on, no need for thanks. And if you're thanking someone, thank my aunt. If she hadn't come to pick me up, I wouldn't have caught up to you." Turning to the middle-aged woman in the back seat, I quickly expressed my gratitude, only for Joe to burst into laughter. "You've got it wrong, Sam. She's our housekeeper. My aunt's in the front seat." Confused, I looked to the driver's seat and realized Joe was right. The woman driving wasn't a woman at all. She was a girl. From my angle, I could only see her sharp, delicate profile, but she was clearly younger than Joe. "Thank you," I said politely. She didn't seem pleased, her tone frosty. "It's nothing." Joe leaned over and whispered, "Don't take it personally, Sam. She's always like this, walking around like everyone owes her money." Speechless, I didn't know how to respond. The girl in the driver's seat, however, spoke coolly. "Joe, if you don't want me telling my brother about your failed exam, shut your mouth." Joe stuck out his tongue at her, but stopped talking. That's when he noticed my injured leg. "Sam, what happened to your leg? You're bleeding so much." I tried to downplay it, but Joe's aunt immediately instructed the driver to head to the hospital. At the hospital, the doctor carefully cleaned my wound and prescribed some medicine. While Joe went to get the medication, his aunt and I waited in the crowded lobby. There weren't any free seats, and my leg ached from standing too long. But I was too embarrassed to ask for help, so I stood there on one leg, gritting my teeth. Suddenly, a pair of hands gently supported my arm. Startled, I looked at her. She turned her head slightly away, her cheeks tinged pink. Her tone was awkward but firm. "Don't push yourself when you're already in this state." I awkwardly scratched my head, muttered a quiet, "Thank you," and let her warm, slightly damp hands steady me. After a moment of silence, she suddenly asked, "Sam, do you really not remember me?" Under the light, I could finally see her face clearly. Her features were delicate, as if drawn by an artist, every line soft yet precise. Her complexion was like the faint blush of dawn, a subtle warmth radiating from her. But when you looked closely, her expression held a frosty elegance, like sunlight on a snow-covered peak, beautiful but distant. Her eyes were veiled with a misty haze, as though a shimmering light danced just out of reach. I searched my memory carefully, but aside from knowing her through Joe, I couldn't recall any other connection between us. And Joe rarely mentioned his family. Tonight was the first time I'd learned he had such a young aunt. Puzzled, I looked at her. She lowered her gaze, seemingly disappointed. Then she said, "Brightwood High School. Third debater for the opposing team." The words hit me. I suddenly remembered last year's debate competition. Representing our school, I had gone to Brightwood High School to compete against them. The host school. Their third debater didn't speak often, but every word she said was sharp and to the point. Of course, I hadn't backed down, and our debate turned into a direct face-off. I even remembered her name. Tentatively, I called out, "Sarah?" At last, she smiled, and her frosty demeanor melted into something warm, like snow thawing under the first rays of spring. But I couldn't smile back. The name Sarah suddenly reminded me of that dream, the one where she seemed to be my future affair partner. When Joe dropped me off at home, he pulled me aside, his face full of concern. "Sam, what's going on with you and Lily?" I thought of Lily running off after Mark earlier, her figure disappearing into the rain. A sharp pain pricked my chest. Forcing a smile, I told him everything was fine. But deep down I knew Mark and Lily were no longer the people I used to know. Perhaps because of the rain, I came down with a high fever that night. In my haze, I had another strange dream. In a dark, windowless room, I stood frozen, teeth clenched, watching an older version of Lily walk away from me. Time passed. Or maybe it didn't. I couldn't tell. Suddenly, a small hand reached out and gripped mine tightly. Though the hand was tiny, its warmth was overwhelming. She led me downstairs, where she gently pushed someone into my arms. That person's scent was faintly of oranges, a fragrance that strangely calmed me. When I woke up, 2 days had passed. My mom was by my bedside, worry etched all over her face. After I assured her I was fine, she finally relaxed and handed me a bowl of freshly cooked porridge. As I ate, I noticed a beautifully wrapped box on the nightstand. Mom explained, "I don't know what's wrong with you kids these days. After you collapsed that night, Lily came over completely soaked from the rain. When she found out you had a fever, she refused to leave your side all night. She left this box for you. It's your birthday present." I stayed silent. The next day, as soon as I stepped out of my house, I saw Lily waiting at my door. She greeted me with a casual smile, waving as if nothing had happened. I ignored her, brushing past and heading downstairs without sparing her a glance. She followed me, tugging lightly at my sleeve when I wouldn't acknowledge her. "Sam, I'm sorry," she pleaded. "I shouldn't have left you alone yesterday. I know you're mad. Please don't ignore me, it makes me feel awful. I pulled my sleeve away and quickened my pace. She hurried to catch up and grabbed my arm again. With a bitter laugh, I said, I saw you throw yourself into his arms. Her face flushed deep red. She shook my arm as she stammered, I was scared. That little girl said Mark was badly hurt, and when I got there, I panicked. It was an instinctive reaction. I don't like him at all. I hate him, actually. Seeing my expression grow colder, she grabbed my hand, her voice trembling with urgency. Sam, I'm serious. I've only ever liked you. The only person I want to marry is you. I froze. For years, our mutual feelings had been an unspoken secret between us. I had even prepared a crystal swan necklace for her, a gift I planned to use when confessing my feelings on her birthday. But now, her confession, something I had longed for, came at a time and in a way I could never have imagined. The moment I had eagerly anticipated felt hollow and meaningless. With a sigh, I turned away and left. Lily followed silently, her backpack slung over her shoulder. For the first time, our walk to school was devoid of our usual banter. At the school gate, we ran into Joe. He didn't comment on the odd atmosphere between us, but when he got out of the car, I caught sight of Sarah sitting inside. Her gaze was as frosty as ever, especially when it landed on Lily beside me. It was so cold it seemed to seep out of the car. Curiosity stirred within me. What had led the future me to a point where I would elope with Sarah? Time passed quickly. Lily and I never brought up that incident again, returning to our usual routine of going to school and heading home together. On the surface, nothing had changed, but deep down, I knew my feelings for Lily had faded. When had I realized it? Perhaps when Mark stopped coming to school. I noticed how often Lily would glance toward the classroom door during breaks or look around the basketball court as we passed by, as if searching for someone. Sometimes she even scribbled Mark's name absent-mindedly on scraps of paper. When she realized what she'd done, she'd blush furiously, crumple the paper, and toss it into the trash. Habits are terrifying things. I had grown accustomed to Lily always being by my side, and now Lily had grown accustomed to the persistent presence of Mark. Watching her confusion and hesitation, I found it both absurd and laughable. I wanted to tell her, if you care so much, why not go to him? The turning point came one afternoon. I was reading under the gardenias by the school field when Lily stormed over, brimming with frustration. It was rare for her to lose her temper with me. The few times she had, it had always been playful, a way to get me to spend less time gaming with Joe and more with her. But this time was different. She threw Mark's journal at my feet and demanded, Sam, why did you say those things to him? Her eyes brimmed with disappointment. I already told you I don't like him. Mark has been keeping his distance, so why did you go behind my back and humiliate him? I stayed silent, watching her outburst. Then I picked up the journal. As I flipped through its pages, I began to laugh. Mark had written that I insulted him behind his back, calling him shameless for chasing Lily, and even incited others to bully him. He recounted the day we had met in private when I told him to focus on his studies. He wrote, "Words spoken lightly by someone standing on high only deepen the self-loathing of those already in the dark. Perhaps I was never meant to exist in this world." I tossed the journal back to Lily, sneering. "Lily, you don't seriously believe this melodramatic nonsense, do you? He's just putting on a pathetic show, wallowing in self-pity like a clown. It's laughable." Lily's face flushed with anger. "Sam, whether I believe it or not doesn't matter. Mark has depression. Who would joke about something like that? And yet you still speak about him like this. I really misjudged you." I shook my head. "I'll say it again. If you believe this garbage, you're just as ridiculous as he is." Her eyes filled with disbelief, her lips trembling as she raised her hand to slap me. But I caught her wrist and returned the slap instead. She clutched her cheek, staring at me in shock. I looked at her coldly. You two really are a perfect match, two fools meant for each other." Tears streamed down her face as she grabbed my arm. "Sam, this is a matter of life and death. Mark might do something irreversible. Please, come with me to apologize. If something happens to him, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." One by one, I pried her fingers off my arm, speaking each word slowly and deliberately. "Lily, I didn't do any of those things. If you want me to apologize to him, that's never going to happen. Not in this life, not in the next. And even if your pleas make me want to die, I won't feel guilty." Her tear-streaked face looked at me full of disbelief. I turned and walked away without looking back. I sighed, thinking to myself, how did we ever end up like this? Lily began visiting Mark's house every day, claiming she was taking care of him and apologizing on my behalf. When I heard about it, I almost vomited from disgust. Lily, I knew her too well. She was just using me as an excuse to see Mark openly. Her family lived right above mine, so occasionally I'd run into her on the stairs. Every time she'd look at me as if wanting to say something but stopping herself. I knew what that meant. She wanted to reconcile. But I found it ridiculous. She couldn't let go of Mark, yet she couldn't bear to break things off with me either. Pure madness. That day, I was at home solving practice problems when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. When I finally checked, I saw the messages were photos of Lily and Mark. In the pictures, Lily was smiling gently at Mark, her eyes filled with feelings she probably hadn't even realized. Mark, on the other hand, seemed fully aware that I'd see the photos. He was smirking provocatively at the camera from an angle Lily couldn't see. So this was the guy who was supposedly depressed? My fingers tightened around the phone as I waited for more messages from the sender. Luckily, they didn't keep me waiting long. "Dad, say goodbye to your 17-year-old heart. Next, I'll tell Lily a truth that will make her leave you for good." It was hope. I didn't take it too seriously. I was more curious. What kind of man would I become in the future that Hope would go to such lengths, even risking her own existence to stop me and Lily from being together? But her efforts weren't wasted. Things were indeed heading toward the outcome she wanted. Still, the thought of Hope disappearing made my chest ache. Could this strange bond really be because of blood ties? Hope worked quickly. The very next day after school, Lily dragged me into an empty classroom. Hope and Mark were already there. Lily didn't waste any time. With red-rimmed eyes, she asked me, "Sam, when we were kids, during that summer in the countryside, I fell into a deep pit. Who was it that saved me?" Her question caught me off guard. It took a moment to recall what she was talking about. Back then, Lily had just started middle school. She'd been in an accident on her way to school and couldn't walk for months. During that time, she became temperamental, throwing and breaking things whenever something displeased her. Everyone, including her parents, avoided her. But I was an idiot. I thought she was just going through a tough time and needed someone to stay by her side. I believed that once she recovered, she'd return to being the sweet, gentle girl I knew. So I endured her tantrums and started accompanying her to her physical therapy sessions. Sometimes I'd tell her jokes to make her laugh. I also helped her keep up with schoolwork, taking notes in duplicate every day so she wouldn't fall behind. But none of it seemed to cheer her up. Then summer came, and we went to her grandmother's house in the countryside. One evening, she insisted on going out alone in her wheelchair. When she didn't come back by dusk, I panicked and went looking for her. I found her lying beside a deep pit. When I called her name, she finally woke up. Seeing it was me, she burst into tears and threw herself into my arms, saying, "I'll listen to you. I'll try to live well." Now Lily was looking at me with pain in her eyes, waiting for an answer. I replied, "I don't know. When I found you, you were lying beside the pit." Mark scoffed. "You're lying. You tricked Lily. If it weren't for you, she and I wouldn't have missed out on so many years. I thought she remembered me all along." I looked at them coldly and said, "I'll say it again. I don't know who saved her. Lily didn't say anything when she woke up, so how would I know? And I never claimed to be her savior. If she assumed that on her own, what does it have to do with me? I, Sam, don't need to steal credit from anyone." "Enough!" Lily couldn't take it anymore. She looked at me with utter disappointment. "Sam, all these years, I was in love with the wrong person." I stayed silent for a long time, before finally laughing bitterly. "Lily, I'm curious. If it had been a dog that saved you that day, would you have fallen for it? Your love is so cheap." So cheap that it wasn't worthy of me. Hope had been right. It was time to say goodbye to my 17-year-old heart. In the end, Mark led a sobbing Lily out of the classroom. I slumped against the wall, my mind a chaotic mess. A soft sniffle caught my attention. I turned around to see Hope in the corner, blood dripping from her nose. Panicked, I reached for my phone to call for help, but she stopped me. Helpless, I took her to the restroom to clean up the mess as best I could. After we left the school, I saw her standing there in a daze. A strange unease stirred in me, and before I could think it through, I walked back to her. "Want to stay at my place tonight?" I asked directly, and she hesitated before nodding. When we got home, my mom had already prepared dinner and was sitting on the couch with my dad, waiting for me. I told them Hope was a classmate who needed a place to stay for the night. They didn't mind at all, and even took an instant liking to her, holding her hand as they chatted. For once, I saw Hope drop her usual guarded demeanor, sitting quietly and behaving herself. Then my mom exclaimed, "Now that I look closely, Hope's nose and mouth resemble Sam's. Even that little mole on her nose bridge, Sam used to have one there too." I froze, instinctively glancing at Hope. She was already staring at me, with a complicated expression. I had always noticed how much Hope resembled Lily, but now I saw she had some of my features as well. It was a feeling I couldn't describe. Aside from my parents, there was someone else in the world who shared my blood. Fearing my parents might catch on, I hurriedly sent Hope to the room I had prepared for her after dinner. That night, with Hope in the house, I had an unusually long dream. In my dream, I married Lily. She was as gentle and lovely as ever, just like when we were kids. I treated her like a fragile treasure, holding her with the utmost care. We shared countless sweet moments, just as I had once imagined, a love that would remain sweet forever. But everything changed with our first fight after marriage. The argument began because she insisted I quit my job to care for her during her pregnancy. She was dissatisfied with every nanny I hired, replacing them 7 or 8 times in just a month. She wasn't happy unless I was with her every second of the day. At one point, she even called my boss and berated him over the phone. That fight escalated quickly, involving both our families. I chalked it up to hormonal mood swings during pregnancy and apologized first, promising to take leave during her later months. She tearfully admitted she just felt emotionally unbalanced. It wasn't fair that men didn't have to endure what women did to have children. She didn't truly blame me. Feeling guilty, I hugged her tightly. But after Hope was born, Lily seemed to change entirely. The woman who once didn't care much about punctuality now left the house early every morning, skipping the breakfasts I prepared. She often came home late, smelling faintly of smoke. Suspicion gnawed at me. I hired someone to investigate, and the truth came crashing down one day. Armed with evidence, I stormed into her office and caught her laughing and chatting with Mark, her hand resting on his arm. Mark was unrecognizable from his high school self. Gone were the thick glasses and timid demeanor. He now wore a tailored suit and styled his hair with precision, exuding confidence and charm. When they saw me, they both flinched and immediately moved apart. Mark greeted me awkwardly, but I ignored him, focusing on Lily instead. She panicked, quickly telling Mark to leave before grabbing my hand to explain. She claimed it was just a joke. Tired of her excuses, I interrupted her, slamming the evidence I'd gathered onto her desk. At first, she cried and begged for forgiveness, confessing everything. She pleaded for another chance, but I was unmoved. Disappointment overwhelmed me, and I firmly demanded a divorce. That's when she snapped. If you had quit your job to be with me, if you hadn't ignored me, do you think this would have happened? She screamed. Furious, I retorted that she was unfit to be a wife or mother, that even her choice of affair partner was pathetic. Her response was laughter, bitter and mocking. She unleashed a tirade, comparing me to Mark. She said Mark was resilient, composed, and attentive, while I was spoiled and mediocre, relying on my family's connections for success. She claimed that if we had started from the same place, I would be a failure. At the time, my mother was gravely ill, her life hanging by a thread. The weight of Lily's words pushed me closer to the edge of emotional collapse. That was when Sarah entered my life. She was my mother's attending physician. "You're Sam," she said, "and you don't need to compare yourself to anyone else." That single sentence pulled me back from the brink. At the end of the dream, Sarah reached out her hand to me. "I've always been here," she said. "You only need to turn around to see me." The dream was so vivid, so real, that it left me believing it might truly be a glimpse of my tragic future. When I woke up, my face was damp with tears. Looking up, I saw Hope sitting at the table, her chin resting in her hand as she stared at a photograph. The picture showed me with my parents, all of us smiling brightly. "Hope, why did you lie to me?" I asked suddenly. Startled, she turned to look at me, her eyes wide. I gave her a bitter smile. "It was Lily who cheated, wasn't it?" Hope shot to her feet. "How do you know that?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I locked eyes with her panicked gaze and said slowly, "Why did you come back? Do you hate me so much that you're willing to erase yourself just to push Lily and Mark together?" Hope lowered her head, her expression unreadable, but her voice trembled as she replied, "Yes, I hate you, Dad." With that, she ran out of the room, my hands clenched into fists, the pain biting into my palms. I couldn't understand why she would do this. Lily and Mark ended up together. I heard the news while attending Joe's birthday party at the Hill family estate. Unable to endure the pitying glances from everyone in the lively hall, I excused myself and stepped out. After all, who would have thought that Mark, once dismissed by everyone, would actually win over Lily, the school's star, and that too while she already had me, her childhood friend? Before I knew it, I found myself in the Hill family's small garden, where I saw Sarah sitting on a swing, reading. A gentle breeze brushed her dark bangs aside, revealing her ever-calm eyes. On her lap was a box of candy, more than half of it already gone. I couldn't help but smile. This elegant young lady had an unexpectedly quirky side. Hearing the sound, Sarah looked up. When she noticed me staring at her candy with amusement, her ears turned red, but she maintained her composure. "Want some?" I nodded, took the candy she offered, and sat on the swing next to her. Suddenly, I thought of the dream I had. I asked, if I were just an ordinary person with no shine or privilege, would anyone still like me? It was a strange question, but Sarah answered seriously. "Of course," she said. My heart raced. "Why?" I asked. Sarah smiled, a radiant smile, like starlight in the dark night. "I'll never forget the first time I saw Sam," she said. "Your eyes were confident and composed. During that debate, even when your team was at a disadvantage, you stood firm, presenting your arguments with conviction. Though you narrowly lost, you won everyone's admiration. I believe that a man like you could never be truly ordinary. Even if you lose your way temporarily, you'll eventually find your light again. Sarah's gaze met mine, her tone soft yet resolute. But honestly, no matter how many people love you, it won't matter if you don't love yourself first. Never doubt yourself because of someone else's words. Her words warmed my heart and cleared my mind. Looking up at the sky, I murmured, "Thank you, Sarah." Later, I treated Joe to a full day at the arcade, even renting out the entire place so we could play freely. By the time we finished, Joe had to rush to a private birthday dinner his parents had arranged for him, so I let my driver take him there first. Before leaving, he told me to wait. His aunt would come pick me up. I didn't want to trouble her, but to my surprise, Sarah arrived within 2 minutes. It was as if she had been nearby all along. Without waiting for me to say anything, she grabbed the plush Jigglypuff toy I'd won at the arcade and hugged it, nuzzling it playfully. "Consider it a gift," I said politely. She scoffed lightly. "I'm not taking it for free." Pulling a hand-knit khaki scarf from her bag, she suddenly wrapped it around my neck. "Let's go," she said. "I don't have anything else to do anyway." When we reached my building, I saw Lily and Mark standing nearby. They were leaning close, chatting intimately. Just as their lips were about to touch, Lily noticed me. Startled, she pushed Mark away, looking flustered. Mark's expression darkened, but he quickly put his arm around Lily's shoulder, giving me a challenging look. "Fancy seeing you here, Sam?" he said, his gaze shifting to Sarah. He paused, his expression turning complicated. "Already found someone new? Good. Saves you from pining over someone else's girlfriend." Lily frowned at his words, her tone indignant. "Sam, who is she?" I rolled my eyes, too tired to argue. "Why does it matter to you? Besides, for someone who questions other men so freely, your boyfriend sure is understanding." I glanced at Mark, whose face twisted in frustration. I turned to leave, but Lily stepped in front of me, her eyes red, lips trembling. "You owe me an explanation," she demanded. I almost raised my hand to slap her, but before I could act, Mark interjected, yelling, "What, you're going to hit a woman now? If you're a real man, hit me instead. Bullying women makes you what, a tough guy?" It was the first time anyone had ever made such a request to me, so, without hesitation, I granted it. Before he could finish speaking, I punched him square in the right eye. Stumbling back, Mark tried to say something else, but I followed up with a sharp slap across his face. He froze, crouched on the ground, cursing me for being dishonorable, but he didn't dare get up again. Even so, Lily still blocked the staircase, refusing to let me pass. I sighed, ready to push past her, but Sarah stepped forward instead. Her gaze was icy as she stared Lily down, her presence intimidating. Unable to argue, Lily stepped aside, though her unwillingness was clear. Sarah adjusted my scarf and said with a knowing smile, "Go on up, don't get the scarf dirty." I nodded and hurried upstairs. That evening, Lily knocked on my door. Outside, she wore her usual smile and said cheerfully, "My parents aren't home tonight. Can I join you for dinner?" In the past, I would have been overjoyed to welcome her in, but now, looking at her face only filled me with disgust. "Lily, don't you think this is ridiculous? Don't tell me you're with Mark but still haven't let go of me?" Her smile faltered briefly, and pain flickered in her eyes. "Sam, can't we even be friends?" "No," I replied bluntly and slammed the door in her face. After a moment, I reopened it. Lily's eyes lit up, but before she could speak, I tossed a box at her feet. "Here's everything you've ever given me. Take it back. And as for what I gave you, keep it. I don't want it anymore." She stared at the box, stunned, then somped down to pick up the topmost item. Inside was the gray scarf she had painstakingly knitted. Its soft texture shimmered gently under the dim light. "What about this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You don't want this either? I made it stitch by stitch." I looked at her coldly. "I don't need it anymore. It's tainted." The Lily who once cared for me so deeply no longer existed. I didn't tell her that I'd noticed how she stayed up late every night to finish the scarf for me. She would never know how much I once wanted to cherish her forever, to grow old together. As I closed the door, I saw her clutching the scarf tightly, her face filled with pain and confusion. Life seemed to return to its former rhythm. Only now there was no Lily, and Sarah was slowly becoming a larger presence. Sarah always found excuses to visit Joe and would conveniently bring an extra lunch, inviting me to try it. On weekends, she often asked me to join her at the library to study. Finally, during one of these library visits, Sarah couldn't hold back anymore. "Sam," she asked, "why don't you respond to my feelings? Do you even realize how I feel about you?" Caught off guard, I nodded awkwardly, then shook my head. Her expression turned puzzled. "Isn't it obvious? I make special lunches for you and even invite you out on dates." I was speechless. What kind of dates always take place in a library? And as for her special lunches, who considers dishes like cucumber salad, cold tomatoes, boiled eggs with soy sauce, or, most absurdly, plain rice with 2 sausages a heartfelt gesture? I sighed and leaned closer, whispering in her ear, "How about we go to the beach next week? I hear there'll be fireworks at night." Sarah's face turned crimson as she pressed her lips tightly together and nodded emphatically. Satisfied, I couldn't help but smile. After parting ways with Sarah, I returned home just as heavy rain began to pour. Watching the downpour through my window, I found myself wondering, where was Hope? Or was she even still here? A wave of sadness crept into my heart, tinged with a faint bitterness. "Sam?" A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. Turning around, I saw Lily. Her face carried a mix of sorrow and joy. "Sam, I broke up with Mark." I froze for a moment before replying flatly, "That has nothing to do with me. You didn't need to tell me." I turned to head upstairs, but she suddenly hugged me from behind. A faint scent of alcohol lingered in the air, making me frown. "Let go, Lily," I said, my voice filled with disdain. Her voice trembled as she cried, "Sam, I was wrong. I finally realize now that it's you I've loved all along. I can't stand living without you. Can you forgive me?" By the time she finished, her words were barely coherent through her sobs, but I felt nothing. I shoved her to the ground without hesitation. As she sat there in pain, I looked down at her from the stairs and said coldly, "Honestly, Lily, your behavior is pathetic and revolting." Thinking about her future with Mark only deepened my loathing. "Maybe I should thank you for leaving me," I added. Without sparing her another glance, I turned and walked away. But through the heavy rain, I caught a glimpse of a familiar figure. Excited, I tried to get a closer look, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. Bitterly, I smiled to myself. Was I thinking about her too much lately? Lily was attacked by Mark's creditors. They intended to take revenge on her, and they didn't hold back. She was struck in the head and rushed into surgery. My mother told me the news while I was making plans with Joe for a summer trip. As I stared at the glowing red light above the operating room, I thought of the message Lily had sent me just hours earlier. "Sam, summer is almost here. Will you go to the beach with me one last time?" Since our last meeting, she had messaged me every day, but I never replied. In fact, I had blocked her. She didn't know that I already had someone else to go to the beach with. Outside the operating room, her parents sat on the Sam Cheech, weeping uncontrollably. My parents tried to comfort them, though their own eyes were wet with tears. I stared blankly at the sterile white walls of the hospital, my emotions a tangled mess. At the end of the hallway, I suddenly saw Hope in a white dress. I walked toward her, and she took my hand, smiling gently, a smile I had never seen before. "Dad, it's my birthday today. Can you make me a bowl of noodles?" Her request startled me. Seeing the anticipation in her eyes, I found myself agreeing. At a nearby diner, I borrowed the kitchen and quickly made Hope a bowl of noodles. Steam rose from the dish, blurring her features, making her expression unreadable. But then she spoke. "I'm the one who told those people where to find Lily." She looked up, her tone calm, yet piercing. "I'm the reason she's lying in that hospital bed, fighting for her life." I stared at her, overwhelmed with questions I didn't know how to voice. Hadn't she been helping Lily all this time? Didn't she hate me? Why would she do this? In the end, I felt too exhausted to ask. Hope's actions and words had always been beyond my comprehension. Perhaps today had drained me too much. I slumped over the table and fell asleep, slipping into another dream about the future, a dream I hadn't had in a long time. This time it was all about my daughter, Hope. I saw her as a newborn, her grape-like eyes shining as she smiled at me. I saw her at 5 years old, crafting a clay cake and singing "Happy Birthday" to me after Lily forgot my birthday. I saw her at 10, proudly telling everyone at the parent-teacher meeting, "I have the best dad in the world." I saw her at 13, brandishing scissors at Lily and Mark after learning the truth about their betrayal. Finally, I saw her at 15. She found Sarah at the hospital and solemnly said, "If you ever treat my dad poorly, I'll haunt you even as a ghost." Sarah, wearing her white coat, didn't laugh at the seemingly childish threat. Instead, she somped down and held out her pinky. "I understand. Let's make a promise," Sarah said. Hope hooked her pinky with Sarah's, smiling brightly. After leaving the hospital, she sought out a secluded spot and took out an old-fashioned phone. "All right," she said. "If you can really take me back in time, then bring me to the moment before my mom confessed to my dad." The phone responded, "As you wish. But why not simply tell your father about the future? Why choose to push them apart by slandering him?" Hope paused for a long time before smiling faintly. "You don't understand. My dad is the kindest, softest person in the world. If I didn't make him hate me first, he'd stop me. He might even relive the same pain just for my sake." At last, I understood Hope's greatest secret. She loved me. She had always loved me. Tears streamed down my face as I reached out for the daughter in my dream, only to watch her fade away. Choking back sobs, I called after her. "Hope, would you still want to be my daughter in the next life?" She turned to me, smiling innocently. "Of course. Hope may not be a kind girl, but to Dad she's always been a good daughter." I shook my head, forcing a smile through my tears. "I'm sorry, and thank you." When I woke, the seat across from me was empty. Tears still wet my face as I realized the journey of love and time had truly come to an end. The doctor said that while Lily's life was saved, it was unlikely she would ever wake up. When she was rushed to the hospital, covered in blood, they said she was clutching the gray scarf she had knit herself. Hearing this, I simply stared at the sky in silence. In the distance, Joe waved at me, grinning. "Sam, let's go to the beach." Beside him, Sarah looked at me with gentle eyes. I stood up and ran toward them. "Let's go." The following summer, I graduated alongside the rest of my senior class. As the season of endless sunshine faded, I joined them in stepping onto our respective college campuses. 4 years later, I graduated from the School of Law with honors and became a successful lawyer. Sarah and I got married, with both of our families expressing their wholehearted approval. One of my greatest joys was teasing Joe by making him call me uncle. He would always try to hit me, yelling about how I had somehow managed to board Sarah's pirate ship. 3 years into our marriage, Sarah became pregnant. She insisted on going to work every day and refused to take leave. I found myself distracted at work, constantly worrying something might happen to her. But Sarah reassured me not to fret, and with a knowing smile, banned me from even thinking about quitting my job for her sake. She promised to take care of herself and reminded me that we had a housekeeper to help out. She added, "Besides, if I'm not at the office, who's going to stop Joe from playing games during work hours and running the company into the ground?" When Joe overheard this, their bickering turned the house into chaos once again. 7 months into her pregnancy, my mother told me that Lily had woken up. Sarah said, "You two spent so many years together. If you have time, you should visit her." I stayed silent for a moment before nodding. On a weekend, Sarah and I went to the hospital. In the lobby, I unexpectedly ran into Mark. I remembered that he had been forced to leave school due to his family's debt collectors causing constant trouble. He never took the college entrance exams, and instead moved to a small town to work off the debt. Now, seeing Mark in faded, worn-out clothes, his face unshaven and his expression weary, I felt a pang of recognition. But when he spotted me, his old resentment flared up immediately. "Sam!" he spat, clenching his fists. "Why? Why are you so lucky? Why am I the one left in ruins?" I couldn't help but laugh. When he had the chance to work hard, he threw it all away in his obsession to win Lily over. Now that his life had fallen apart, he blamed others for their good fortune. Deciding he wasn't worth my attention, I took Sarah's hand and walked away. In Lily's hospital room, I saw her staring blankly out the window at the sunlight. Time had left its marks on her face, but the shadow in her eyes disappeared the moment she saw me. Her voice trembled as she called my name. "Sam." I had already let go of the past, so I nodded in acknowledgement. Her lips began to curve into a small smile until she noticed Sarah behind me and the curve of her pregnant belly. Lily's expression darkened as she gazed at me silently for a long time. Finally, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Sam, I wish you happiness." I smiled at her and said, "Thank you." 3 months later, Sarah gave birth to a daughter. Her eyes were as bright as stars, and her tiny form nestled into Sarah's arms softened Sarah's entire expression. But when I noticed the small mole on her nose, my eyes filled with tears.